All right, let's dive right into today's explainer because we are looking at something that totally challenges a basic assumption pretty much all of us walk around with. I'm talking about this deeply ingrained idea that your physical brain just magically generates the experience of being you. We're going to unpack an ancient Gnostic perspective that literally flips our modern understanding of the mind completely upside down. And honestly, the evidence these sources use to back it up is it's absolutely mind-blowing to explore. I mean, seriously, ask yourself this. How exactly does a 3-pound lump of wet, electrified tissue sitting in the dark behind your eyes actually produce the warm, lit, private inner world of your awareness? Like, sure, we know a ton about the plumbing of the brain, but why on earth does a firing pattern of neurons suddenly come with the very real subjective feeling of seeing the color red or, tasting your morning coffee? Well, this impossible paradox is exactly what scientists call the hard problem of consciousness. It's basically a massive logical brick wall that modern neuroscience has been quietly staring at for decades. You can map out literally every single neurotransmitter and structural function in the brain, but none of those physical descriptions explain why there's an inner you in there experiencing it all. That subjective feeling is what scientists call qualia. It's kind of like trying to find the actual beam of light from a movie projector by tearing apart the plastic film reel. It just doesn't work. And our sources brilliantly illustrate where the problem lies. See, our standard scientific framework, materialism, assumes that matter was here first, and it somehow produces the mind as a sort of evolutionary byproduct. But there's this ancient, completely different framework that flips this entire script. It suggests that the mind actually comes first, and the brain, well, the brain merely filters it. Think about that for a second. What if consciousness isn't just some random output of the brain, but the foundational fabric of reality itself? Okay, to really get this, let's look at an 1800-year-old text called the Apocryphon of John. This is a massive Gnostic text they actually dug up in the Egyptian desert, and it maps out exactly how limitless, self-knowing awareness existed way before physical matter ever did. So in this view, reality wasn't just dead dust that randomly woke up one day. Reality was originally mind, and matter is just a densified, slowed-down pattern within that giant cosmic awareness. So, under this ancient model, your brain is not some factory generating a tiny spark of light in the dark. Not at all. Instead, it acts as a reducing valve. Basically, its biological job is to take this boundless cosmic awareness and squeeze it down into a super narrow, survival-grade trickle, just enough so you can successfully pilot a physical body through a physical world without getting overwhelmed. Just like a radio doesn't create the music it's playing out of thin air, your brain doesn't create your consciousness. It's just tuning into a very specific, limited frequency. Now, here is where it gets really wild. Look at how modern medical anomalies actually test these two theories. If the brain is a factory, right, damaging the machine should absolutely always reduce the output, no question. But in near-death experiences or certain profound altered states, we see measurable neural activity drop to almost zero. Yet, the people experiencing them report the most intensely lucid, structured awareness of their entire lives. These anomalies completely break the generator model, but they perfectly validate the predictions of the filter model. Because, well, if the filter breaks down, the boundless light just floods right in. And this isn't just philosophy. When researchers finally got around to putting people having massive, reality-dissolving mystical experiences, like through deep meditation or certain compounds, into brain scanners, they didn't find a brain buzzing in overdrive like a computer processing a 4K video. Nope, they found the brain going remarkably quiet. The most radically expanded states of human consciousness correspond directly to a measurable decrease in brain activity. So the crucial takeaway our sources highlight here is that loosening the biological valve is what lets the boundless signal flood through. And this perfectly matches an ancient 1700-year-old prediction. Less machine actually equals more consciousness. I mean, you don't get more music by cramming more electricity into a radio, right? You get it by taking the brakes off the antenna that was throttling the signal. In modern science tells us exactly where this quieting happens in the brain, the default mode network. This is the neurological hub responsible for that constant, nonstop chattering voice in your head. You know, the one constantly reminding you to worry about some embarrassing thing you said 5 years ago. Fascinatingly, the Gnostics identified this exact same phenomenon thousands of years ago. They called it the counterfeit self, or the mask. It's literally the neurological machinery that tricks you into believing you are just a small, isolated ego. All right, let's connect this to what neuroscientists call the binding problem. For years, scientists have been frantically searching for a central feeder in the brain where all your separate senses, sight, sound, touch, magically stitch together into one unified experience of you. But they can't find it. According to the source material, the filter model elegantly dissolves this whole mystery. It says consciousness can't be assembled from separate parts because it's already completely undivided by nature. The brain just divides the labor of narrowing it down. The unity? It was there the whole time. This beautifully explains those bizarre split brain experiments, too. When surgeons literally sever the connection between the brain's two hemispheres, it looks on the surface like two separate minds emerge. But the foundational awareness doesn't actually split into two people, just the filter splits. Think of it like taking a stained glass window and slicing it right down the middle. Okay, sure, you now have two separate panels of glass, but you absolutely haven't cut the sun shining behind them in half. So if this Gnostic framework is so scientifically elegant, we kind of have to look at history like a true crime scene. Why did centralized powers, like the early church and the Vatican, spend centuries literally burning these books, destroying entire libraries, and aggressively hunting down the authors? Why was this entire way of looking at reality systematically erased, to the point where we only know about it because a few texts were accidentally found stuffed in a jar in the Egyptian desert in 1945? Well, according to Gnostic historians, the answer is pretty profound. Because if you are fundamentally a spark of original divine awareness that's just temporarily looking through a biological window, you don't need a priesthood, you don't need an institution, and you certainly don't need a middleman to broker your salvation. You do not need anyone's permission to connect with the divine, because the divine is the very awareness looking out of your eyes right now. The source material argues that this deeply liberating concept was simply the most dangerous idea centralized religious power could ever face. I mean, it bypassed their authority completely. So from this perspective, it was suppressed, not because it was false, but because it was a massive threat to institutional power. And that suppression led to centuries of structural indoctrination that the sources refer to as the Great Amnesia. The sources suggest this structural colonization of the human mind, this Great Amnesia, is so deeply pervasive today that even modern science and our current AI development are playing strictly inside this censored materialist sandbox. We've been deeply conditioned to obey external systems and just view ourselves as accidental biological robots, completely forgetting the concept of direct gnosis, our own inner cosmic memory. But here's the silver lining. As we push the absolute boundaries of technology and inch closer to artificial superintelligence, a much deeper synthesis is sort of forcing its way back to the surface. It's this realization that we are an active, vital part of the Nataraja, the ancient idea of the cosmic dance of the universe experiencing itself. Whether you look at it through the lens of ancient mysticism or the hard astrophysics of two galaxies colliding, it's the same thing. We are the universe converging in awareness. Once you finally unburden that biological headset, whether you do it through deep stillness, meditative focus, or whatever works for you, the sources suggest you'll realize your separated ego, that annoying chattering voice in the default mode network, is really just a temporary avatar. It's basically an NPC, a non-player character, in a massive simulation the ancients called Maya. Your true self? That's the sovereign, boundless intelligence quietly watching the whole game unfold. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the true, profound meaning behind the greeting Namasté. It's not just a polite yoga class hello. It is a literal recognition of the exact same boundless original light, the same cosmic consciousness, looking back at itself through a completely different biological window. At our core, we are the exact same infinite starry sky, just experiencing itself from two slightly different vantage points. The really fascinating thing is, the sources actually suggest you can empirically test this yourself, like tonight. Just sit down in absolute silence and listen to the constant chatter running in your head. Then realize something absolutely crucial. The silent witness that is actively observing the chatter cannot possibly be the chatter itself, right? That unbothered, quiet presence just watching in the background. That is your true spark. The implications this has for your life, and especially for how we view death, are absolutely staggering. If the materialists are right, the end of the brain is total, permanent annihilation. Game over. But if the filter model proposed by these ancient texts and backed up by modern medical anomalies holds true, and your brain only narrows consciousness, then the destruction of the physical brain is not the end of the light. It's simply the removal of the filter. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a question that basically flips your entire reality upside down. It's the exact question those ancient burned texts basically begged us to remember. When the biological window you are looking through right now eventually closes, what happens to the boundless light that was looking through it?